Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm very pleased today to be introducing Dagmar Schmidmaier to you, although I'm sure some of you have actually met her before. She's been to New Zealand on previous occasions. Dagmar comes to us with a truly stellar background in both leadership and leadership in libraries. She's got a very strong commitment to leadership education and development. From 1995 to 2006, she was both CEO and State Librarian of the State Library of New South Wales. Today, she's coordinator of the Chief Executive's Women Leaders Program and a member of the Council of Chief Executive Women. She's also the chair of the Aurora Foundation and lots more other things which are in the flyer that you got. Today's talk is called The Ring of Leadership, Looking for Magic, which sounds ever so slightly Middle-earthy, and I think that's very appropriate for Wellington. It's a very tantalising topic, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say, Dagmar. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation, so keep those questions in and we'll make sure you have a chance to have a chat at the end. I'd really like to acknowledge the efforts of the National Library Foundation in bringing Dagmar to us, and particularly the great work of Joanna Woods and the lovely cream tea as well. So I'd like to ask you all to welcome Dagmar now. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that welcome, and I'm delighted to be here and to see some familiar faces. It's lovely, and it's lovely to be in Wellington again as well, even though it is raining, but you'll be surprised to hear that it's actually warmer than in Sydney. It's been freezing. So, although I bought my big coat just in case, because Joanna warned me, she said, oh, bring a coat and bring a raincoat and bring an umbrella and all of that. Anyway, this talk today, you know, when thinking about leadership, you sort of think, what on earth can you say that's new? And why do we keep searching for things about leadership? And do we think there is some sort of magic solution that if only someone would tell you, then you could fix it all and it would all happen and it'd be great? Not so long ago, my husband and I went to a concert at the Sydney Opera House. And it was in the Sydney Opera House, and it was the full Sydney Symphony, and it was The Lord of the Rings, so you were quite right. And it was the Fellowship of the Ring. And the Sydney Symphony played the original music, and then the film was shown in a screen above the orchestra, and the Sydney Children's Choir was there, and the Sydney Philharmonic was there, and it was fabulous. And the range of people in the audience ranged from the very young to the elderly, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful evening. And in looking at the program afterwards, I mean, I wasn't sitting there thinking about, you know, what leadership lessons can I learn out of this? But in looking through the program afterwards, I've thought, now there really is something here that I think could make this talk very interesting. And when I looked at the program, it explained the key themes of the Lord of the Rings was community, friendship and loyalty. And then, as I'm sure you know, there's been so much written about the Lord of the Rings, and you've probably read much of it yourself. But Tolkien always said that he left it up to the reader to interpret the story, and I've taken his advice today. So as the story develops, and these themes emerge, one can also see the development of self-awareness, confidence and leadership in the central character. And the story also describes different cultures and their key behavioural characteristics. So we have the rural hobbits, the mystic elves, the utilitarian dwarves, the rustic and abrasive stonecutters, the industrialised orcs and the world of men. And I wonder if you can think of some of these cultures in your own organisation or other organisations that you've worked in. And for each of these cultures, there are different characteristics of leadership on display. There is, of course, the evil of Mordor and Sauron's power, which is tied up with his forged creation, the ring. There's the gentle leadership displayed through the wisdom and experience of Gandalf. And there is the waning cultures of the elves and dwarves, which are in decline and they're losing their power. And there's the world of men and Gondor, and an indication of what mankind could be, should it choose the noble path. and the beginning of the formation of the Fellowship of the Ring, and you could also say the development of heroic leadership in this particular aspect. Then there's the gradual awakening of Frodo, and we can see the development of self-awareness, confidence, and the realisation that he has to step up and take a leadership role. So why are we so eternally interested in this leadership question, as I mentioned originally? Well, I think we all need guidance and the ability to test our views and values. We also seek direction and support from those with more wisdom and experience than ourselves to ensure that we are aware of the consequences that result from our actions. In organisations and communities, a meeting is often called, and I'm sure you can all sort of relate to this. So you go to a meeting, a course of action is discussed, and in many instances one person's nominated to take the role and to carry the task out. And do you often wonder why that person is chosen? What characteristics did they display? And are you silently sitting there thinking, why wasn't it me? I would have liked to have done that. And did you put your hand up? So have a think about the last time this happened to you. And you might want to, I don't know if anyone's got any pen and paper, but I should have at the beginning said to you, which is what I meant to do, but I got sidetracked slightly. Why did you all come today? Was it the cream tea? Was it Bill saying, you better get over there, guys? Why did you come? Do you expect to get something out of today's talk? And are you going to do anything different tomorrow? So it's my challenge to you, and I'll come back to that at the end. So one of the key things that we all deal with when we're talking about leadership and when we are acting as leaders in all of our roles, because we lead in whatever position that we're in, is to develop and maintain strong professional relationships. Relationships is everything, and they are based on trust and respect. And from my experience, when you have issues, it's usually as a result of not having strong relationships in place. And these relationships are the ones that you've built and nurtured with your colleagues over a period of time. And you've done that because you're professionally interested, committed, and passionate in what you do. So you work at your relationships. You don't work in silos. You really reach out and you work with other people. So that when something happens, you can pick up the phone or drop round to someone's desk and say, look, there's an issue here. We need to sort this out. And so in terms of thinking about this, I've got a little mnemonic that you might like to file away and might be useful for you. And it's the word clever. And C stands for content knowledge. Are you technically competent in your field that you're working in? Do you feel really confident that you've got that on top of that? L is about listening and learning, and asking questions and seeking information. And E is about educating your colleagues and the wider community that you're dealing with about your role and how you add value to your organisation. It's not about telling them what you do, it's about how you add value. And V is about verifying the facts. So when you're going through this process, check the facts and data. And E is about evaluating what you have heard in the broader context. And R is about relationships, developing and nurturing them so that they're in really good shape when you need them. And if it's all about relationships, what are you doing in this space? Is it up on your horizon? Do you make an effort to say good morning to people? To walk around your team? To do that every day? Are you consistent? You know, I had somebody when I was at the State Library who worked in one of the areas who had dealings with every day, would never say good morning. Used to irritate me, like, you just wouldn't believe. I thought, well, here we are, and I'd get an email instead about something or other. I mean, it is just awful. So relationships and getting to know people is really, really important. Now, networking, I think, sometimes has a bit of a bad connotation about it, or can have from time to time. And if you think it's a negative sort of thing, you might want to reassess your view, because I think that all work environments succeed or fail on the strength of relationships between people. And as specialist information professionals, we really do need to be excellent at that and work at it, and preferably be interested in other people. So networking is not about manipulation or using people. It's about finding common interests on which to base trust and a good working relationship. Currently I'm involved with Chief Executive Women, who I'm a member of that organisation, and I run their Leaders Talent Development Program. And the program is for senior women in major organisations. So Chief Executive Women has a mission to support women, and in doing that, to change culture in mainly business organisations where there is a predominantly male culture. So initially it targeted the top 200 companies that were located in Australia and worked with those. So those companies are invited to nominate 4 of their talented women to come on the program, which runs for 10 months. We meet once a month. And it's really interesting that the women who come on the program present as they're at the managerial level, they're confident, they're smart, but the thing that they want is more confidence. Confidence to step up and to be able to operate equitably with their male colleagues across the organisation. So it's a really interesting challenge about why this is so. At the Aurora Foundation, with our Emerging Leaders program and the Aurora program, that's one of the things that those participants who go on that also say they want to develop further skills in terms of being confident and being able to step up and meet the challenges that are facing them in their workplace and in their life more generally, I think, too. So I mention this because it really does relate back to that clever word. You have to be able to speak with confidence to be heard. If people can't hear you, if you whisper, a lot of librarians speak very softly, very gently. And if you can't be heard, you haven't spoken. So I think that's really worthwhile remembering. And also being prepared, you know, the thing about evaluating and having your facts straight and having the data, having accurate information is really critical. Just to pull these things together, in our women's program, we had at our last session in June, we had a session where it was about when everything goes belly up, and I'm just seeing Bill sitting up the back there, and it was really about the press. And so when things happen, when there's a story in the press that you know, you'd rather your minister wasn't reading, you can, you know, things do happen. And so we had a journalist coming in and speaking to the group and putting the point of view, what they are looking for in a story, in terms of, and how to deal with that when you're feeling threatened and on the other side and really not quite sure what to do. And it was a really, really interesting discussion because, I mean, the first question that the journalist said was, you know, who's afraid of the press? You know, all the hands went up. You know, you don't want to be interviewed. But the message is, you know, get your facts right and repeat your position on a particular story and be consistent and accurate and be engaged. And I was relating one of my experiences, and you know, we all have situations like this when you're in a chief executive role, and you can have difficult situations. But I had in my youth been to a conference in the technology space when I was working in that area, and I knew a couple of journalists who's kept in touch with me at that time because they're interested in new technology. You know, what's happening in the library field, what's the new technology. And so when I had a difficult situation, I could just ring them and say, look, this has happened, have you got any advice? And so that's about maintaining relationships and being able to call on people who will take your call. So you need their mobile, so you can call them on the weekend when it's really urgent. When you can call and discuss the issues and get feedback in terms of, is this the right way to handle this situation? Because we all need help from time to time. And so I think the other thing to remember in that is that confidence about being able to speak honestly and authentically and being able to get your message across clearly. And that also relies on having all of your data and your facts lined up so that you're really on top of your subject. So as a leader, it's important that you can demonstrate your leadership. And how do you do this? And it's not just from the CEO's position, it's really from any position within any organisation that you provide support and encouragement to your colleagues. And some practical strategies that you may want to consider could be some of these things. About understanding yourself and being self-aware is the first one. What impact are you having on your colleagues by your actions? Being authentic and trusting your intuition, I think, is important as well. I would strongly suggest that you get yourself a mentor if you haven't got one, and not necessarily within the profession. You need somebody who will tell you how it is. You don't need somebody who's going to tell you you're fantastic. That's not what you need. You need someone who'll call you and say, no, that's ridiculous, you shouldn't be doing that, or have you thought about this? I think you need to put in discretionary effort, and that doesn't mean staying in your office till 8 p.m. It means putting your hand up when something additional needs to be done, but being strategic about it. So it's not about time serving, it's about really helping the organisation when they need some help. You need to work hard and look as if you enjoy it, even if sometimes you don't. And you need to think beyond the boundaries of functional expertise to the needs of the organisation and the wider environment in which you're working. So I think it's really critical when you're thinking about your own space, how is this fitting in to the government's priorities, your minister's priorities, and so on, so that you really can explain to your colleagues and perhaps to the team that's working to you how you're in fact helping your organisation to fulfil its objectives. And I've mentioned the networking both inside and outside your organisation. That is, you need to be genuinely interested in people, and you should go for opportunities and accept different roles, and let people know that you're interested and that you're ambitious if you are, or that you want to change if you want to change. And if you have an opportunity to move into another cultural organisation, into a different government organisation, take that opportunity, because you'll come back so much richer from that experience. One of the things that I learned when I was heading up an educational institute, in sitting around the table with 8 other institute directors and the Director General, and I had come from running a library network. When I took over this institute, they sort of said to me, oh, well, you can just keep the library as well. Yeah, right, okay. But when you're doing the budget and all the directors are sitting around and you're arguing about the library budget, I mean, you get a totally different perspective, because it's there lined up with the IT and all of the other things that the organisation needs to do. So you get very different perspectives on your own world by sitting at a higher level and discussing the priorities of, say, education, which was, education in New South Wales is one of the largest government agencies, they say, in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, it's very big, and a lot of money goes into those areas. So if you have the opportunity to go outside and come back, I would encourage you to take that. So the Lord of the Rings, I think, provides a really interesting framework for us to think about leadership learnings. And some of those, I think, that stood out for me and that I've mentioned relate to the culture of your team, and you think about the journey that they took through the Lord of the Rings and the different cultures that they had to pass through and how to negotiate those. Also developing working relationships across these different cultures. The critical importance of self-awareness and empathy as a leader, that is having time for people, is really important, and being consistent. And also understanding different leadership styles and learning how to work with them. So one of the things that you might like to think about is, if things aren't working for you, it's a matter of saying, I think, what can I do differently so that I get a different reaction? It's not why don't they or why don't you, it's what can I, because that's the only thing you can change is yourself. And so you can say, well, this is absolutely not working, so I need to do something differently so I get a different reaction from the person that I'm trying to negotiate with. And then articulating your goal. I mean, one of the things that comes up a lot is that people are generally, I think in our professional area, are a bit modest about saying, I'd really like to have an opportunity to act in this role or to take a job over here. They assume that somebody will notice them. Well, that is not the case, because everyone is busy doing all sorts of things. So articulate clearly what you would want and what career options that you'd like to experience. And I think as a leader, it's great when somebody comes to you and says, you know, I really want an opportunity to work in this other part of the library. I mean, when that happened in New South Wales, I mean, we sort of really looked at trying to create those opportunities, because you want to build and encourage on people's strengths. And most organisations really value that if somebody comes to you with those sorts of ideas. So leadership is enjoyable, but it is hard as well, and nobody's suggesting that it's easy, I don't think. It requires passion and commitment and creativity and resilience. And as I said earlier on, there's a huge literature on the topic. And I look through the Harvard Business Review every month just to see what's there, and you see all the topics being recycled and the subject areas coming round again, slightly different twist on them. But it's good to have that refreshment. It's good to be reminded that you can do things differently and can think about things differently. And I think what you learn from that is that the magic is within you. It's not something external, and there's no quick fix, but it's inside you, and you can find that by thinking about different ways of doing things. I'll finish with another personal story. Some of you who have been to Aurora might have heard this, but I think it shows that you can make things happen. As one of my board members said to me, you can't have everything, but you can have what you want if you really feel strongly enough about it. Brenda McConkie, who's on the board of Aurora and has been with Aurora from its start, at the end of one of the Threadbow sessions about 4 years ago, we were sitting there talking about education for the profession. And I was at the time president of ALIA, the Australian Library and Information Association, and I had tried to get some traction on the education for the profession. Library schools were closing down. A couple had closed, 3 had closed in Australia. And I thought education was in the doldrums. I felt quite strongly about it because I had been in that area myself. I'd had 8 years teaching, and I thought it was one of the most exciting and stimulating periods in my career, and I just couldn't understand why it was disappearing off the map and why it was being just nobody had any real interest in it. So Brenda and I were sitting chewing the fat over this up at Threadbow, and she said, well, you know, in the Commonwealth government in Australia, in Canberra, there's a real emphasis on records management and librarianship, and we can't get professional people to apply for the roles. So agencies need to have their records in shape, and there really isn't the staff for it. So we decided we would approach the newly appointed Vice-Chancellor of the University of Canberra, and they had closed their library school a couple of years ago, and go to him with a proposition saying we believed there was a need for this program. We looked at his priorities for the university and made sure that we got our facts together so they lined up with his priorities. We got an appointment. He was interested. There's then processes that followed, went through the academic board, and the course has now been running for a couple of years. So I'm telling this story because if you feel strongly about something and you get yourself organised, you line up all your ducks, you can change things. But you do need to be strategic about it. And I'll just give a little plug for Aurora as well. I mean, some of you here have been to Aurora. We have a new and revamped course which is now running at the Q station, the old quarantine station in Sydney. And I think those of you who have been will agree it's a great site. And we have some wonderful presenters who are both actors and have been both on television and on the stage. And they have been working with leaders to instill and give them some of the skills that they've learnt in acting in terms of presenting and style and status and how to negotiate and all those sorts of things. So the course, if you keep a watch on our website, the course runs once a year, usually between May and July, depending. And we also have introduced a new component, which is that everybody does an instrument called the Learning Styles Inventory, which some of you may have done, which really looks at how you perceive yourself as a leader, and you get feedback from other people about how they perceive you as a leader, and then you can put those two things together and see where there are matches and mismatches, and then you can decide if you're going to do something about it. So we do that as part of the program as well. We want to keep up the very close connection with New Zealand. We've always had about 1/3 of the participants coming from New Zealand, and that's continued into this new program, so that's been very successful. And I think it's really important to have that and to continue that sharing of knowledge and ideas between our professional areas across Australia and New Zealand. So I hope that really will continue, and I encourage you to keep your eye on that. And we're looking at running a masterclass in innovation and strategy at the end of the year. So that'll be a 3-day event. Again with the same presenters, and we're just working on getting that together, and that will come up on the website as well if you're interested. So back to the beginning of where we started. Do you think I've captured your interest today? Will you remember anything? Lord of the Rings? Lord of the Rings. Okay. Those of you who have a pen, are you going to write down something? What are you going to do? What are you going to do differently tomorrow? You're going to read something? You're going to change the way you think about something? What are you going to do? You know, over the years, I have always done this when I've gone to a conference or to a meeting, and it's amazing what you come away with, because there's no point in going to something if you actually haven't thought about it first. I mean, you can be totally surprised and think, oh, well, you know, I'll just rush off and fit this in. But it's a bit like going to a meeting and not reading the agenda or your papers. So I don't know what sort of homework you did before you came today, whether you did a bit of Googling on me or Aurora, or, you know, I mean, like, who is this woman? You know, and what are you coming to hear me for? You know, surely you're going to prepare yourself, and then you make a decision and you say, yep, I think I can allocate the time and I'll go and listen to that person. But, you know, you need to make strategic decisions and say, okay, no, I've heard all that before. I don't think she's going to be saying anything new. I'm not going. If Bill will let you. But you do need to start thinking of, you know, I think in that way. But I find that you can always get something out of a talk that you go to. And if you have the opportunity to go to different professional areas, I think that's a really good thing too. When we were teaching librarianship and we were a new school, exciting new curriculum, the first thing that the new head of school did was we were in Sydney, take us up to Newcastle, to the university, to look at the teaching methodology at the new School of Medicine there. And that was a resource-based new learning structure, a postgraduate course. and it was really fascinating, and it really impacted on us as to how we designed and structured our new program. So in those early days, I learned really early on that you can go to a totally different area and you can really pick up some interesting ideas that you can then apply to the sort of work that you're doing and make it more interesting and creative. So I think I'll leave it there because I said absolutely not more than 30 minutes. You'll all be bored and falling off your chairs. So thank you all very much, and I'm happy to take some questions, comments, or anything.
I was interested when I saw the topic of your talk, the ring of leadership, and I thought, oh gosh, Dagmar's going to do a thing with the Lord of Rings. And I thought, well, I guess so, because it's Wellington and it's New Zealand and it's a good fit for us. But I also thought, the destructive power of the ring and what you do with that, which you didn't go there. It was interesting when you were talking about the different tribes and how that, and reflecting on that in terms of the different tribes within our libraries, equating that with some of the different tribes within the Lord of the Rings. I've got a real soft spot for the hobbits, probably to do with stature. But I also got a real thing for the Knight Riders as well, and I wondered how come it's the baddies that always get the best outfits. One of the things that I take from your talk was your clever, and there were two things in there in particular that resonated with me. One was content, know your stuff, and the other was the last letter, which was relationships. I think your talk is extremely timely for us in the National Library as we go into a new era of being a National Library in a broader context, in a bigger department. And it was partly about my question around does leadership and power necessarily equate with seniority in terms of authority and decision making? And I don't think it does. I think we've never been more aware than we are now that relationships are what will make the difference, not necessarily who happens to be in the spot that has got a fancy title to it. So I think that was timely in that respect. You asked why did we come to this talk, and I have to admit that Dagmar Schmidmaier, that's all I needed to hear, because I know you and I haven't seen you for about 4 or 5 years, and I'm always interested to hear what you've got to say, knowing what I do about you. I met Dagmar, I don't know how many years ago, but certainly we had a little bit of time together when I was a mentor on the Aurora program about 5 years ago. And much of the credibility and success of the Aurora program, I think, is due to you directly, and the drive and I suppose the insight and wisdom that you bring to that program and the leadership. And that's why I've never had any hesitation in recommending and encouraging staff and organisations that I've led and managed to put their hand up for that opportunity and support them to do so. It's been a very stimulating afternoon. I think we've got a good bunch of people here who have found your talk most interesting, and I think won't hesitate and join with me in saying thank you for a great talk.